Hi there. Now we're going to read inside of part 2 of the workbook for students. We are in section number 12, which comes right after lesson 330. And this section number 12 is what is the ego. So here Jesus is expanding upon what the ego is all about. Paragraph 1. The ego is idolatry, the sign of limited and separated self, born in a body, doomed to suffer and to end its life in death. Yes, we've been taught that what we are is a human that has a birth and a death, and we live our lives from that moment of birth, waiting for the moment of death. That's how you know that your ego is idolizing the body, is totally focused completely in a sense of separate self. Because if you knew that you are eternal, why would you be so concerned about the body having a birth and a death? You would be owning your eternalness, and your focus would be in what the soul in you is doing, not what the body is doing. Sentence number 2. It is the will, this is the will of what the ego is, the separate sense of self. It is the will that sees the will of God as an enemy and takes a form in which it is denied. The ego is the proof, quote unquote, the proof that strength is weak and love is fearful. Life is really death, and what opposes God alone is true. So when we're operating from our ego self, we look at the special relationships as an opportunity for me to find somebody who will love me, and that allows me to feel like I matter, like I am special, like I am somebody. And when I get somebody else to love me, then I'm denying my ability to be the one who is in alignment with God so that I can receive the love of God directly. The ego convinces me that I need it from somebody else. This gives me proof that love is fearful, that strength is weakness, because when I begin to see another person as my source of my love, then I begin to feel weak, like without them I can't be okay. And that makes love fearful, because if you leave me, I am going to suffer. So the ego has convinced us that all of the things that are inherently natural inside of us are strength, that love is inside of us, that we feel it as we give it. The ego has convinced us that it is out there somewhere, and that if I don't get it, I'm not going to be okay, and I better get it before this body dies. And all of that becomes proof that the ego uses to say there's not really a God, because I'm going to die, there can't be a God. That person's going to leave me, there can't be a God. I'm going to suffer, love hurts, there can't be a God. So we have bought into all kinds of ideas that are not true, that we have to take an inventory about the thinking that is in our mind, see the thoughts and beliefs that activate fears, that activates the perception of separation, and begin to understand what the ego is. It is a thought system. It is idolatry. It is an idea that something can oppose the will of God, and that's impossible. And that's what we begin to return to once we do the self-inquiry process. Paragraph number 2. The ego is insane. I cannot put it any simpler than that. When I began to watch my ego, as I was in the middle of my experience between my son Spencer when he was doing drugs, and experiencing how my husband at the time, Ken, would be in this incredible just anger with me that I was allowing my son to do drugs, well, I was listening to guidance. I was listening to the voice of God that said, don't judge your son. But when I wasn't judging my son, my husband felt like I wasn't listening to him. I wasn't following his wishes that drugs not be used in the house. Well, to be frank, I needed to listen to the voice of God, because it was the one that brought me peace. Hearing my husband threaten me that he was going to divorce me, or that the police was going to show up, or that he was going to take, all the money from me. There was nothing but threats. And I began to observe, wow, this ego is insane. He who wants peace is activating all kinds of fears. Instead of seeing, where am I getting my peace? How can I be okay with something that society says is not okay? Instead of being curious about what's going on inside of Laina, it was all about protecting himself from what was perceived as a threat, which was Spencer and Spencer's drug use, and my allowing that drug use to happen, because that's the guidance that I was receiving. Now, the world thought I was insane, but I could see the insanity of the world, because the world was trying to control external circumstances to find their peace, and I was finding my peace because I was listening to guidance from within. That is how we know that the ego is insane. In fear, it stands beyond the everywhere, apart from all, in separation from the infinite. So in Ken's fear, he was totally not connected to the everywhere. He wasn't Spencer. He wasn't me. He wasn't one with the universe. He wasn't one with God. So from that space, he felt separate, that these people, Spencer and I, were the ones who were actively hurting him and keeping him from his peace. Sentence number 3. In its insanity, it thinks it has become a victor over God himself. So instead of allowing God to guide him, he thought, I need to take control because only I can decide what is the best way for me to protect myself. Sentence number 4. And in its terrible autonomy, it sees the will of God has been destroyed. It dreams of punishment and trembles at the figures in its dream. Its enemies, which were Spencer and I, who seek to murder it before it can ensure its safety by attacking them. So instead of observing that he had fears, which was nothing more that he didn't trust that there was God, that the infinite mind was assisting me, instead of aligning with what was happening in the moment, he was basically separating himself from it, seeing Spencer and I as potential threats that wanted to hurt him, that wanted to kill him, that wanted to inflict pain and suffering upon him. Instead of him seeing that, which is what insanity is, can't see really what's happening, then he began to ensure his safety by attacking us. And when I began to see that, I had to learn, wow, I can't be attacking him for attacking us, because then I'm doing what he's doing to us. My work was just to say, God, what would you have me do with Ken? And what would you have me do would come in the form of just be gentle, just be defenseless, just let him move through what he's moving through. Just be the presence of love. Love the soul that is in him, and know that your work is to tolerate the ego, not to judge it, but be in tolerance, as it is taught in the manual for teachers. Tolerance is one of those characteristics where you are practicing discernment and you recognize this person is insane, but we forgive them. They know not what they're doing. Ken did not know that his mind was filled with fear, and he couldn't acknowledge that he was in fear. So all that happens is it gets projected outwards, and then we attack those that we think are attacking us. It was wild to watch that, but it helped me see where I was getting on my high horse, my spiritual pedestal, attacking Ken for attacking us, and I had to remove my attacks and come back in here. Paragraph number 3. The Son of God is egoless. When we acknowledge our soul, when we live from the truth of who we are egoless. There is no ego when you are thinking, believing, knowing what you are as God created you. Ego is the thought that I am other than how God created me. So to accept my egolessness, I could not think with the ego. I had to think like God thinks. My beloved husband was caught in suffering. That deserved compassion. That deserved kindness and patience. It didn't deserve me attacking somebody who was scared that he was being attacked. Paragraph still number 3, sentence 2. What can he know of madness and the death of God when he abides in him? I could not be in insanity, and I wasn't worried about death. I wasn't worried about Spencer's death, let alone I couldn't be worried about the death of the relationship, the death of anything that was coming between Ken and I, because I needed to trust, as one of the lessons in the Course tells us, everything is a lesson God would have me learn. So I'm like, Holy Spirit, what would you have me do? What would you have me say? Why? Because I wanted to practice that egolessness in me, so that in that egolessness, I could be the presence of love that could most impact Ken's experience. Because to not be attacked by me was in the only way that it could happen for him to feel that even in his fear, he was being accepted. Even in his tirades, he was being accepted. And that gives us a sense of maybe I have value, that I'm not being attacked, that somebody's accepting who I am. It's not to feed the ego, but it is to speak to the soul. Because in my egolessness, my soul had to have compassion for the soul of Ken, who was trapped in there. He didn't have access to that side of him because he was listening to the voice of the ego, but his soul and my soul were in communication, and all it could I could communicate to him was love, kindness, compassion to someone who in that moment is in fear, in terror. Sentence number 3. What can he know of sorrow and of suffering when he lives in eternal joy? So to be in my space of trusting that Spencer was in the hands of God, here's my 14-year-old child doing drugs, and that lasted for 4 years. That was quite the journey for 4 years. Knowing that he was in God's hands, I felt a peace inside of me. That felt joyful. Then putting Ken in God's hands, that felt peaceful, that felt joyful in me. And only because my ego wasn't telling me to judge Ken. It's because I was practicing being egoless in that moment. Why? Because the Son of God is egoless. That is how God created us. Ego is what we made to block ourselves from knowing ourselves as God created us. Sentence number 4. So what can he know of fear and punishment, of sin and guilt, of hatred and attack, when all there is surrounding him is everlasting peace, forever conflict-free and undisturbed, in deepest silence and tranquility? When my mind, was being egoless, I wasn't judging Ken. In that tranquility, in that stillness within me, I could hear the voice of God. And the voice of God, all it can do is extend love, compassion. It feels like acceptance. Why? Because I cannot punish, I cannot fear, I cannot sin, I cannot hate, I cannot judge when I am focused with only what God created, which is love. If I am seeing the benevolence of an innocent being in front of me, my mind cannot be judging what I have decided is innocent. Once we get that, you cannot hold two opposing thoughts together at the same time. You can bounce between the two. And when you go to the thoughts of innocence, you feel peace. When you go to the thoughts of judgment, you feel unease because it's a signal. The body doesn't lie. It is telling you you are thinking with the ego. That's why you feel uncomfortable. Move to that, well, you know what? They're innocent. Just as Jesus did. Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. He was defenseless with his attackers. They put him on a cross and nailed him to it. He never once said, stop it, pull away. He didn't defend himself. He wasn't judging. He was knowing, I'm eternal. I am not this body. The ego uses the body to hide from the truth of who we are. Jesus was proving that he was not hiding from his truth. Rather, he was showing through the resurrection, I'm not a body, I am free, for I am still as God created me. Now, to live from that place requires an incredible practice, requires a determination to really embody these teachings that A Course in Miracles is offering us. I made that commitment for myself. So I live in that space of alignment consistently now. It has been so far a 17-year journey in this year 2019 that we're in. And I will, for the rest of my life, make a commitment to stay in this alignment because I don't want to give up my peace. It feels so joyful being me. I am happy to be me. I am peaceful being myself. The only time my peace gets disturbed is when I start judging, when I entertain a fear-based thought. And because I have become extremely, very selfish about how I feel, I'm not going to entertain thoughts about anybody that are unlike what God thinks about them because I would have to pollute my mind. I'm not going to do that to myself. I like feeling blissful. I like feeling peaceful. Let's go to paragraph number 4. To know reality is not to see the ego and its thoughts, its works, its acts, its laws, and its beliefs, its dreams, its hopes, its plans for its salvation, and the cost belief in it entails. To know reality, to know God's reality, you cannot participate in ego thoughts. You have to draw a line in the sand. You have to decide this is of the ego where judgment happens. This is of God when love, compassion, kindness, tolerance, gentleness, joy, defenselessness, open-mindedness, when generosity and honesty happens, when you are trusting at that level, on this side, you stand with God and you will with God. And what will happen is you will be free. So you align yourself freely with God, you will be free. But what we have been using our free will to do is to align with the ego in judgment and reacting to what is happening, thinking the world has power over me. And we're being asked to cross the line and say, this world does not have any power over me. This world is a projection of my disconnection from God, my separation from God. And I've projected these people who are hurting me. Well, to see those people as here as reflections of me who are here to help me return to the truth of who I am, we have to accept them as teachers. Well, God, what would you have me learn from that one? And in order to do that, you can't be judging them. So while Ken was judging us, and then my reaction was to judge him, I was just as insane as he was using my ego. When I shifted and said, God, what would you have me do? I want to be egoless. I had to begin to accept him even while he was doing what he was doing, judging and blaming and accusing Spencer and I of things that we were not doing. Me specifically accusing me of using his money when there was absolutely no evidence of that whatsoever. But it was the one thing that he could take from me, because he couldn't take anything else from me. These were not his children. This was not his house. All that he could take from me was the money that he was using to pay for some of the things that allowed us to stay in the lifestyle that we were living in. And of course, that helped me see things that I needed to look at. Where was I willing to sell my soul for a lifestyle? So I had to see that. That helped me see things that I was releasing that assisted me in further moving into my egolessness. Sentence number 2. In suffering, the price for faith in it is so immense that crucifixion of the Son of God is offered daily at its darkness shrine, and blood must flow before the altar where its sickly followers prepare to die. This is a pretty grim statement. But when you begin to realize that when you are suffering, what you are doing is you're paying the price of crucifying yourself. You're polluting your mind. You're putting vileness inside of you. You're saying things to yourself that are not true. Other people can hurt me. Let me attack them before they hurt me. So you're believing that you're vulnerable, that you are weak, that others can affect you. Instead of owning the truth of who you are, you're making a blood sacrifice because you are hurting yourself. You're poisoning yourself. You're making yourself sick. I don't know what is going on with Ken, because he would not speak to me after, let's see. He stopped speaking to me maybe about a year or so ago. And so I don't know what's been going on with him. But I do know from his daughter that he has had more heart issues. And that doesn't surprise me, because he attacked the love that we had. He attacked that love that would have been his healing power. And when we begin to attack love, we begin to attack ourselves. We're basically letting ourselves be hurt. And slowly we create a shrine to darkness. We create a shrine to discomfort. And in that place, we slowly prepare to die. We die inside. We shrivel up inside. We can't be our holy, happy self because we are afraid of the world, so we shrink in. Paragraph number 5. This is a final paragraph in What is the Ego? Yet will one lily of forgiveness change the darkness into light, the altar to illusions to the shrine of life itself, and peace will be restored forever to the holy minds which God created as his Son, his dwelling place, his joy, his love, completely his, completely one with him. I began to forgive myself for the judgments that I was making on Ken. I began to forgive myself for forgetting that I had a choice. I could see him as the presence of innocence, or I could see him as somebody that could hurt me. When I began to forgive myself for being deluded, being delusional, being insane, and thinking that he could take anything from me, I began to realize how I was thinking with the ego. And that gave me even more compassion for him. So while I was in my fear, and I could still have awareness to see that I was in fear and I had a choice, he was in fear, not knowing that he had a choice. So it was a regular thing that I did was to say, please forgive me. And he didn't understand why I was saying that. He would say, why do I have to forgive you? It's not you. It's Spencer that's doing something. And I would say, no, I want you to forgive me for anything that I've done that has you believe that I don't value you as the magnificent being that you are. And I don't know if he took those to heart. I don't know. It's not my work. That's between him and the Holy Spirit. But I knew that I had to ask for forgiveness. I knew that I had to forgive myself for moving to that level of density of ego mind, of ego thinking, of fear, all of these things that it says here, where we're in fear, we're in punishment, we're in suffering, we're crucifying the Son of God. I knew that I could not do that to me and maintain my peace, my serenity, my bliss, and be egoless. For me, it's very clear. I either think with the ego or I think with God. I had to make a choice, and my choice was to become egoless and think with God. Thanks a bunch, and I'll see you in the next lesson.